Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 74 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game up to the next level, I am Sara.
And I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
You know, surprisingly well considering how quickly I had to throw stuff together tonight.
There was a flurry of technical prowess that happened at the computer today.
Yeah, and if you didn't catch that, that was all live just a second ago. So, we squeeze things in when we can.
So happy International Podcast Day for those of you just joining us.
Yes, and for those who are listening to us live, like Hulavu and Knox, thank you for joining us on the live chat.
Yeah,
We'd like to see more people there. But yeah, it kind of came out of nowhere because I had forgotten about it, honestly. I haven't been listening to a lot of podcasts on a regular basis, so I haven't been hearing the intros. And luckily, Vicky had been, and she's like, hey, International Podcast Day, get on this crap.
Right.
And I'm like, oh crap, I am a terrible person in our culture.
Rob,
what?
We have a podcast.
We do! And we are terrible at marketing. But no, really, it's a great thing, and I applaud all of those who pioneered before us. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's a ton of shows out there, and some of it has amazing content. You know, not like our little thing here, but like. But I mean, everything from, you know, like old radio style shows like you were talking about that have been rebirthed into this new thing. People doing readings like Clark's World does, news, you know, in quick events. Like if you just want to get like a stripped down version of the news that has no BS attached to it, you can get that. Yeah. You know, or game news, which is a great way to get it if you're working on something else and you don't have time to read an entire article about the new X-Bone, you know. Right. You know, you want to know what's going on with that, just flip on a podcast. I assure you someone's got one.
Well,
you know?
it was certainly the podcast that I listened to that kind of inspired us to start, or inspired me to approach you about starting this podcast.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to my gaming podcast. If you were listening earlier, I mentioned the EchoCast with Bon Diesel for the Division 2. And there was a couple other Division 2 podcasts I was listening to at the time as well. And I was just thinking to myself, I was lamenting, like, man, you know, I wish there was something that I had the expertise on that, like, I could talk about. Like this. But there's nothing that I really, like, know that well that, like, I could even, like anybody would even want to hear me talk about. Like, all I do is play D&D all the time for the last 25 years. Oh, my God. Hey, hold on a second. Rob.
Exactly.
Rob.
Yeah. Should we do a podcast? I mean, it's really not that hard. Well, could we just do it in our basement? I ain't doing it that way. Now we're in the basement. Go figure. You know?
Right.
It just took us a little while to get back to here. So
it only took a plague.
Yeah, oh, man, so much is screwed up. Let's not even get into that. Oh, so anyways.
Yeah.
So we have a topic tonight. And we actually have a crap ton to talk about.
Oh, my God. We have so much to talk about.
So we started this with the idea of, we're going to do a mini-series. Do you think each one of these is going to have enough to talk about? Yeah, I think we could talk an hour about that. Then 4 pages later.
It didn't even start with a mini-series, though. It started with, like, you know, we should talk about encounter design, like how to build combat encounters. And, like, well, you know, combat encounters aren't the only type of encounters. And then it just went from there. And we ended up with, like, 7 show ideas or something like that out of it.
Well, I said I wanted 20 shows before we did anything.
Right.
Like, and we did it, like, in a matter of minutes.
We did.
Which was beautiful. But I think this mini-series idea is really, really great. I hope all you guys really enjoy it.
So we're going to talk a lot about encounter design. And so we'll start a little bit about talking about what an encounter is and stuff like that. And today's show is going to be about specifically designing combat encounters and we try to keep this as system agnostic as possible. So there's a lot of different issues to kind of look at when you're designing combat encounters just from an overhead standpoint. Now, obviously things like D&D, you know, you have challenge rating and stuff like that to build things in with, but just from the broad standpoint of building combat encounters, man, there's a lot to look at.
Well, and it's not just one system. And so, all right, so when we're talking about encounters, the whole mini-series wrapped around encounters are scenes that have, meaning. That's the shortest way that I can say it. So you're stopping the narrative, you're just speaking, to have the players do something that's important to the story. Whether it's important to them, whether it's important to plot, whether, what kind of lasting effect. It is a scene like a scene in a movie. Some
sort of goal or stakes attached to it. So
correct.
The reason we're differentiating this from a scene is because a scene can just be a conversation between a couple people. There's no real stakes there. There's no real challenges there. It's not to say that it's not important to the narrative. Obviously, information gets exchanged there. It can move the story along.
Players can want to have a scene with, a shopkeep. Or they could want to have a scene with a noble, or whatever.
But an encounter is really when something happens.
When there's a trigger, yeah.
And the outcome is not necessarily, preordained to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is significant enough that it will move the story in a direction.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of we went back and forth about, and I agree with, is that an encounter is not a scripted event. It is, so when it can lead to or come from scripted events, but if you're expecting your players to be part of a large scale battle where you have a defined goal that the wall is going to fall and a rush of bad guys are going to come in and they should leave, and you're going to kind of push them to leave, it is an encounter, but not really. It's a scripted event.
Yeah.
I mean, combat's going to happen, but you're still forcing the hand of a direction. There's not a lot of options involved in that process. And we're not saying that isn't necessary. That does. A lot of times it happens at the beginning of stories to help bring about a story or bring about a piece of plot in a direct manner, but it is not necessarily an encounter because they don't have their hands involved in changing what's going on.
Exactly. All right, so you had jotted down some notes here. Is the 3 necessities for encounters?
Yes. Now, Guy, who does the How to Be a Great Game Master, is the one who I'm totally 100% stealing this from because I think it is brilliant, as he is brilliant.
Credit where credit's due.
I'm not going to say, if you ever listen to the show, I 100% think you're a brilliant man. I think everyone should go check his shit out. I will make sure there's links up there, because not only am I going to put the link up for this one, but for another piece at the end as well, because he goes into a lot more depth about combat. But the 3 things he does talk about are stakes, options, and triggers are necessities for combat encounters. If you do not have good stakes, good options, and triggers, it falls to pieces, and it's obvious that it falls to pieces. I mean, the one example that he gives directly is your players come across a bunch of minotaurs, and you have a fight. Why? Like, okay, so obviously there's the murder hobo gang, who's just going to murder whatever comes across their path, but what are the stakes for the minotaurs? Mm-hmm. I mean, okay, they're minotaur stakes. It's a bad joke, but anyways,
womp, womp.
Yeah, but okay, so they have been, what are their stakes? They've been paid to go after the players, right? So it's money. Well, maybe they kind of see the players geared up and ready to go into a dungeon, and they're fully geared, rested, and ready to go. I'm not stepping in on that.
Right. Maybe it's not enough money for us.
So that's where things can start changing and what the triggers are. They may wait until they come out of the place, broken, bloodied, with less health potions, and their healer, bleeding out of his eyes because he went down 3 times,
So basically what we're looking for is narrative reasons why the encounter should happen.
Correct. From both sides.
I mean, obviously the players are going to have their own stakes and things, but, I don't think random encounters are ever truly random.
No.
You should always at least have something in mind of, even if it is just like a pack of wolves, attacking you in the midst of the night when you're camping.
Right.
There should be a motivation for those wolves. You should always keep in mind why that's happening,
Yeah. We'll get more into the details of this as we kind of break it down, but keep this in mind and we'll keep coming back to it.
So you got stakes for the NPCs.
Yep.
Okay.
Or even the PCs, depending on the encounter.
Sure. What else we got?
Options. So, is everyone ready to attack? Is this combat just going to happen? Like, bar fights can just happen from one guy spilling a beer on somebody else, but encounters can also be, and that's more of a trigger than an option, but is the option there to do it later? Meaning, do those guys see them in town and don't just jump them? They kind of hang off to one side and actually just kind of examine them and gauge when's the right time to do this and if this is even worth it. Maybe the encounter, you've got it scheduled to happen in this town, and you look at them and you're like, I don't want to put these guys there. So you scale back it to a social encounter. The players see, you see a bunch of minotaurs eyeing you up. Okay. What do you mean? Like they're going to jump us? They seem to be hanging out by the side, but they're definitely checking your gear and things like that out. Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to go talk to them. Great. It's like, hey, why are you checking me out? Now there is options for an interaction. There could still be a fight that comes out of that, but it could also just be the Minotaurs like, hey, we don't want any business here. This is Minotaur only dining table. Get off,
sure.
kind of a thing. And then later on, be like, okay, yeah, we're going to take you out now. that you're a little not on your ball, you're drunk, you know?
I'm thinking more back to in my game when the voiceless ones, the one of the rival gangs, ambushed you guys on that bridge.
Yeah.
And I had that fully set up as a combat encounter, but I gave you the option of talking your way out of it.
Exactly.
Which is exactly the option you guys took.
We did.
So, there was multiple ways to solve that encounter, but it didn't mean that it wasn't an encounter anymore, you know?
Likewise, us coming up on the keep, or fort, if you will, that the makeshift fort that was created by the mercenaries. And like one of our players was ready to just roll up on them with some force and be like, okay, we're gonna state our place. And I'm like, no, they've got the higher ground. We're not doing that. We're gonna have a conversation with these guys.
Yep.
You know, and
did you miss the 2 crossbowmen who already have you sighted?
You know, I did not, because I'm a combat person in this. And I'm like, that is death right there, because they're gonna take out our casters and then we're gonna drag their bodies away and we're gonna cry a lot. You know, and so that's where options of how and when things come together really have meaning. And then you have your triggers that come off of that. Like, what is going to trigger the combat? What is going to start that? Is it going to be a beer getting spilled? Is it someone being told that they're weak? You know, is it the fact that they just need to see them a little on the loss? You know, there's a number of ways that you can trigger things and a number of reasons for it, but there has to be something that pushes it. Because again, for the most part, nobody wants to die.
Yeah.
You know, they might get into some fights, but nobody wants to die. And we're going to kind of come back to that a few times in this as well. But like, your players may be murder hobos, but that's because you let them feel that way about their encounters. You know, you got to lay that groundwork early.
You've got to teach your players that what type of game you want to play, you know, and so it's a little in part of your encounter design. This is a lot of where your teaching is going to take place. So setting these triggers and setting these stakes for what will pass, you know, as triggering combat encounter, and what will happen once that combat encounter starts. What options do you allow them other than killing everyone in the room and destroying all the evidence? You know.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, early on, if you want to avoid murder hobos, the stakes should be, you know, for your NPCs should be that they don't want to die. So they're not going to use lethal force.
No.
You know, weapons, I think, should only come out if, you know, they feel necessary, but most people will just want to punch someone that they're angry with, you know?
Right.
Your triggers, triggers for such things can be all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But, you know, leave the options open to talk things down, de-escalate the situation.
And leave other options. If the players throw something wacky or unique out there, maybe it makes a difference. Maybe an illusion gets them to walk away. Maybe they buy round for the entire pub, and now those guys are like, well, I can't not drink, otherwise we'll be suspicious. Let's drink.
Yeah.
And now they get drunk, and suddenly they're carousing, and they become friends.
Exactly.
And by the end of the night, you're like, oh, crap, we're now friends with these guys. We can't take them out. I feel bad. You know, and now there's a different encounter the next morning.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
But let's talk about the planning. Like, how do you get to that point?
Right.
How do we find our way to there?
All right. So you're writing a story, right?
Sure.
Like any good storyteller does. And so you decide you're going to include a combat encounter for whatever reason. The very first thing you need to do is figure out what the purpose of that encounter is. Why are you dropping a combat encounter at this particular point in your story, or at this particular location? So there's a handful of reasons you might do this.
Yeah.
So the first, of course, you know, is the ubiquitous random encounter.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need an encounter in there to kind of break up the monotony of things.
Yeah.
Maybe
they're traveling.
Yeah. Maybe you have a week travel, you know, from point A to point B across some open countryside.
Sure.
And not all random encounters have to be combat encounters, but they can be. And since we're talking about combat encounters, that's the type we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, you just want to have some events that happened on the road, so that it wasn't just a week worth of boring travel.
Yeah, I mean...
And sometimes you montage that. You say, hey, it took a week, you're there, now let's have some story in the next location.
Right.
But, sometimes you throw, I don't know, bandits on the road, a pack of wolves, or something else.
Right.
Something else that's thematically appropriate for your game.
Yeah, and keep in mind that a lot of times people will throw the encounters before a dungeon or something like that, whereas if players are going to go explore something, it doesn't mean that there aren't other people there exploring as well. Mm-hmm. So you don't necessarily have to have the vial of whatever it is, taking care of it. Like, for instance, they're going into a crypt. Great. Does it have to be undead? No. Could be grave robbers. Mm-hmm. It could be, maybe goblins got pushed in there because there was a bear outside.
I had a giant fungus.
Yeah.
In one of mine?
I did the same thing,
yep.
technically. So,
yep.
I mean, there's all kinds of reasons for what something might be taking refuge in an area, mm-hmm. just like they are. If maybe you're rolling for storm stuff, maybe it's mouse guard, mm-hmm. and somebody's doing some environmental stuff, some weather stuff, and it turns bad, and they're going to go take shelter. There's always kinds of things going on with those shelters. Mm-hmm. The weather can be one thing, but that shelter can be a whole nother.
You're not the only person seeking shelter.
Exactly. So,
actually, Knox in the Box it puts in our live chat here. So you're planning a random encounter?
You should always do, and again, if it's combat, you should always be planning at some level, because if you don't plan, you're planning to fail.
Yep. Okay, so actually, okay, and then he comments, "Excuse me while I roll what opponent you're going to have." You laugh.
I've done it,
but that's precisely what old random encounters were. So like we should do another episode on taking the random out of random encounters.
I think we actually have that on the list.
We're
going to address this more.
Yeah. But... So basically, what a random encounter is, just to give a little more things here, is when we talk about triggers to your encounters. Mm-hmm. Okay, a lot of times those can be deliberate in a lot of ways. Of like you angered the big bad evil guy, so he sends his henchmen to come and deal with you. Okay, that's a trigger. You, as the PCs, have done something to cause that combat encounter to come to your doorstep. On the other hand, a random encounter is something that seemingly doesn't have a trigger to it that is quite so obvious. So think, like you've camped for the night and local wildlife, like wolves, mm-hmm. are hungry and there, and you guys look like snacks.
It's bugbear mating season.
Seemingly random.
Yeah.
In that you didn't really do anything to cause it other than wrong place, wrong time.
Right.
And that's really where the random encounter comes from. Now, in older D&D, and I have done this, mm-hmm. If you have, various areas or whatnot, like you might have them trekking through a swamp, so you go through your monster manual. Mm-hmm. Monster manual will oftentimes list monsters that show up in swamps. Mm-hmm. They'll actually categorize them by biomes like that. And so you can look through the swamp things and go, okay, well, what's challenge appropriate for them? And jot down 3 or 4 options, and then... while they're traveling through, you might roll some dice and say like a 20% chance that they bump into something. Mm-hmm. And if they bump into something, maybe you roll another pair of dice to see which of the 4 options that you came up with are the thing that they're going to face that day. So yeah, actually, excuse me while I roll what opponent you have is a thing.
Yeah, and I remember there's a Palladium was stock full of that because they loved their random tables. A lot of the Robotech modules early on would give you what the percentage chance of having an encounter in the hallway was. And I think a lot of that early on was just to help storytellers figure out what was next. Mm-hmm. To break up the pure narration of if you weren't prepared for it, and give some extra things to have happen. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of people also stuck a little too hard to it.
Yeah.
And you were like, well, there has to be an encounter because I rolled 60, and that means that's more than 20, which means they have an encounter that's going to happen on the table.
Right.
For every 4 days of travel, you should roll a die and see. No, don't worry about that.
Don't worry about that. Just build your narrative.
That's right.
So I mean, I'm not huge on random encounters, but
mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can be fun.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be fun.
Yep.
All right. So other purposes for encounters. Mm-hmm. It might be an obstacle to a larger goal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier the big bad evil guy sending his goons to stop you.
Yes.
Okay. He's essentially putting obstacles in front of you to stop you guys from reaching your goal of stopping him.
Yes.
Okay. It might also be something in the way of like the denizens of a dungeon mm-hmm. defending their treasure. I ran a dungeon for you guys where there was a bunch of undead in a crypt. because that's where they were buried, and it was essentially their. I mean, it was their stuff. You know, they were defending their home, albeit from beyond the grave, against you guys, the invaders, who wanted to take their stuff.
Yes.
That's it. It's putting an obstacle in front of a larger goal. Okay. Assault from an outside source. Now, this differs from obstacles in that the players are initiating the intrusion upon the obstacle. Typically, they're the ones that have caused this obstacle to happen.
Right.
Whereas an assault from an outside source is they're on the defensive now. They are being attacked. An ambush, an attack from somewhere they didn't know was happening. Maybe there were just innocent bystanders when, say, 5 giant chromatic dragons decided to stack the capital city.
Yeah.
They just happen to be there.
Yep.
You know, things like that.
Yeah. You never know what you're riding into. But again, the key is that no matter what the combat reason, there's a purpose that they're there. That there's a purpose that it's happening. Mm-hmm. So that, and it's, you don't necessarily have to say the reason why this is happening is because I need to drop some plot. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about why is this combat happening based upon the actors involved.
Exactly.
That's the purpose that we're looking for here. That then leads you into what is the expected outcome.
Right.
Like keep in mind, you're thinking expected outcome, well, the bad guys are going to die, the heroes are going to survive, or they're going to get wiped and or captured, depending on the system you're in, or lastly, they're just going to run away.
Yeah.
They're going to get away. Like, is that the only 3 options? And the answer is no, not in the least.
Kind of, but no. I mean, the thing, you should always write an encounter with an expected outcome. Mm-hmm. Because you should always know why, kind of like where you want the story to move from the encounter.
Yeah.
And what you want the PCs to get from the encounter.
Yeah. Like, how many times have you watched a cartoon and saw the bad guy, like, I've got you now? Like, okay, now what are you going to do?
Right.
And they're like, I will ransom you. To whom? I'm the rich guy. Like, what were you expecting? Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't think this through. Nope, you didn't. Clearly you didn't. Yeah. You know, and that's the kind of thing that you need to be prepared for, is that you can either give them intelligence or plan for that. Like, okay, great, you captured us. Now what? We're going to rob you. We don't have anything. You knew that.
Right.
Like, we're a bunch of adventurers. Come on.
And I think the thing is, though, is that a lot of people go into combat encounters thinking that they're all pitched life or death battles.
Mm-hmm. They're not.
And it's completely not it. There's so many different degrees to that. And sometimes fighting is not even the best option in a combat encounter.
Yeah. And animals know that, and like creatures know that way more than humans do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So like a couple of the expected outcomes I've jotted down. Are the PCs expected to win?
Yeah.
I mean, this is good for if you need a heroic outcome, where the PCs are going to feel powerful.
Yes.
And they're going to wipe the walls with some minions. But it may also be that the violence is less of a threat to life and more of a punctuation mark. And what I mean by that is, you ever get in a fight where you weren't expecting the fight to happen, and even though you handled it, very well and handily, it's actually just kind of shocking to you that the violence happened in the first place?
Yeah.
Like, what? I was not expecting that. Like, for instance, I mentioned earlier, the big bad evil guy may send minions to go and slow the adventurers down. Those minions may just be ruffians.
Yeah.
Hired thugs.
Yeah.
You know? So you don't even know you're stepping on the big bad evil guy's toes. Right. You don't even know the big bad evil guy exists.
Right.
Maybe how he's introduced in the plot is some hired thugs show up and say, hey, boss wants you to back off. And they pull out brass knuckles and a lead pipe. Mm-hmm. And you're like, who are these goons? And then, of course, you wipe the walls with them. Mm-hmm. But it's not the fact that there was a life or death pitched battle there, but it leaves you scratching your head of like, hold on a second, who's this guy that's suddenly mad at us?
Who's this boss?
Right. Why was it important enough for him to send goons after us to try to beat us up? You know?
Right.
It's a clue to a bigger thing that the combat encounter facilitates that movement in the story. The point isn't the violence.
Correct.
The point is the clue that the violence offers.
Right. And that's where it's, are they there to hinder? Are they there to dissuade? Are they there to observe and get caught? Are they just threatening? I mean, that's threats happen all the time. Think back to pulp stuff where it's like, hey, if you don't get off this case, you may end up with some concrete shoes.
Yeah,
they're throwing
beautiful family would be ashamed if something happened to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Like, threats are a real thing, but you have to not only is it a storyteller's opinion to put it out there, but it's also to the players to kind of accept those as threats.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is very challenging.
So actually, you mentioned hindering and slowing down the PCs. That's another thing that you can do with combat encounters. Yep. Sometimes the point is not to kill the PCs. Sometimes it's just to keep them. For instance, big bad evil guy is trying to do his nefarious thing. The PCs come to stop him. He may throw minions at you just to give him the chance to escape.
Yeah,
knowing he may not win this battle. He's going to take his stuff and he's going to get out of there.
That's right. I mean, and that is a common theme over and over is that minions are a means of escape. It is a way to be slowed so that you can hear the monologue as the blimp leaves or as the rocket launches or whatever so that you're not going to get to them. And that is not necessarily saying that's a scripted event. That's just saying that this encounter has that reason because there's some to put some distance between the two of you.
Exactly.
You've gotten too close.
Now, there is your classic threaten the PCs with real danger.
Yep.
And those are, dangerous if not fatal, if not handled directly. The enemy has the stakes in there to want to put them down.
Yeah, and I would always say for your player's sake, let them know that it's lethal or fatal. If the case is coming up in that way.
Yes.
That, I am going to push the envelope on this because this threat is lethal. I want you to feel it.
Yeah, I have gotten in the habit of describing, the violence or the fury with which the enemy is striking is clear. He means to take your life.
Yes.
You can do it in a narrative fashion. You don't have to just look at your players and just out of game say, oh yeah, you could die here.
Yeah.
But, he stands up and he brandishes his two-handed sword and looks you dead in the eye. You can see the fury and anger in his eyes. He means to kill you.
Yeah.
And play continues.
Yeah.
It's part of the narrative, and everybody knows the stakes.
Yep.
And I think the last combat encounter is kind of the opposite side of the spectrum, and that is to overpower the PCs. Some combat encounters are meant to show the PCs that you are not the most powerful force in the story.
Yeah. A dragon stepping in on very low-level PCs is a perfect example of that.
Exactly.
They open up... the opening of Skyrim is a perfect example of that.
Yes. That's actually a great example of it. Yeah.
Where a dragon comes in and literally just starts wrecking the place. You're not the center of attention. In fact, you're in bindings. It's just ignoring you because you're not part of the threat assessment.
I was actually thinking the Chroma Conclave from Critical Role.
Okay.
But it's... Hey, that's pretty much just Skyrim playing out on a grander scale.
It's true. It's true. And plus, a lot of people have seen that opening enough times.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a great example, though, where you're not going to fight that thing.
No.
Even if you picked up a sword at that point in the game, you are not fighting that dragon.
Likewise, if you look at something like James Bond, where 90% of the time, he's not going in there to murder everyone. He's getting away. He's done something, and he is done with his shit and is getting out. And it's busy, or he's trying, he got his bit of information and someone noticed him, and now shit's hit the fan. That's the kind of feeling that you need to evoke in these kinds of overpowering things. Not that I'm just going to keep throwing minions at you until you get the F out of here, but that the players need to shift their mind frame from what they're doing to what they need to be going after.
Yes.
So.
And I think that this one's a delicate one because if you... I find a lot of times if you phrase things as combat encounters, PCs will plant their feet as thinking that they're supposed to fight it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when you're trying to write one of these encounters, you run into that stubborn PC that's like, no, we have to do this. We have to, we have to
keep fighting.
We have to keep fighting. Oh God, we're all dying. We're not going to be able to beat it. And they don't think that they can run.
Right. It's flee is never an option in their mind.
Exactly. And it's worth also noting that this sort of encounter is supposed to shift from a combat encounter probably to like a chase encounter.
Yeah.
Which is something we'll talk about at a later point.
Right.
But this is an encounter they are meant to either lose or flee from.
Right. So then that kind of leads you into, okay, now that we've gotten those defined, those two pieces defined, the thing is what are the lasting effects of the encounter?
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about, do they now have a reputation from this?
Right.
With either the NPC or other people. So, for instance, those, you get those Minotaur thugs, you don't fight them, or you do and you best them but don't kill them. They now know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
They know how you handled that situation. Either they're going to go get friends, or the next time they see you, they're going to be like, yeah, we're just here buying a drink. I'm not involved in this.
In my game, you guys handled some bandits by thwarting them and then essentially talking to them.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you encountered them at a later point, actually going to their camp, they were willing to talk to you because you had shown that you were reasonable and that you respected their lives enough not to just treat them like filth.
Yeah, like a level of compassion.
Yeah. And so when you said, we're here to parlay, they were like, actually, we kind of know that these guys will talk.
Right.
And that changed that whole encounter.
Mm-hmm.
That never would have happened if you'd have tried to fight them to the death.
Right.
If they'd have fled from battle with you chasing on their heels,
mm-hmm.
nah, they'd have just shot on sight.
Yeah. And what was interesting was the way we kind of led into that, but with how we prepared that conversation beforehand, even with the previous one, because even though we had control of their leader, I spoke to him like an equal, so that he would have that equality. Another example that we're kind of going, if we want to go through some movie stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, one of mine was always the Batman scene. Where it's like Batman goes around kicking everybody's butt. So he comes into this building, into this room, and he's searching through the room, and literally one of the goons walks into that room to check the room because he thought he heard something, and they just stand there. Like, he's staring at Batman in the darkness, in silence, just staring at him. And Batman says nothing. He just stares at him back.
Mm-hmm.
And then the goon literally just closes the door, and another guy goes, "Was that anything?" "Nah, nothing." And walks away.
Because he knows there's one thing in that room, and that is an ass-kicking.
Correct. And it's not like he has, any other respect other than Batman's going to kick my ass, and he's having the respect not to do it right this second.
Right. If I go in that room, Batman's going to get the files in there he's looking for anyways, and I'm going to catch a butt kicking.
Exactly.
I could just ignore him. I don't catch a butt kicking, and he still gets the files he's looking for.
So that's where those things. Another one that we always talk about is Snatch.
Yes, the movie Snatch.
Yes.
There's a character in there named Bullet Tooth Tony. And there's this great scene where some thugs roll up on him with like cheap replica guns and try to hold him at gunpoint and intimidate him with these things.
Mm-hmm.
But he is a professional hitman.
Yeah.
And so he just stares them down and gives them this big profanity-laden speech about how they are nothing compared to him.
Right.
And then just dismisses them.
Right.
But it's a great example of how encounters can be solved in an alternate way.
And then
as a storytelling encounter, so you might using D&D terms.
Right.
So these goons roll up on you.
Mm-hmm.
And they point guns at you, and you say, "Okay, what are you going to do?" Expecting that this is going to break into a combat encounter because they're being threatened with weapons. He says, "Well, actually, I'm going to roll intimidate." Okay, roll it. Natural 20, and I'm +9, so that's a 29. Okay, that is a lot. In fact, on top of that, you are so intimidating, you are so nonplussed with them. I'm going to give me a perception check. Okay, roll it. It's an 18. All right, you notice it says replica on the side of their guns. Okay, here's what I say to them. First, I don't even talk. I don't even look up at them. I just drink my beer. Then, I say this.
Yep.
And you give the whole speech.
Mm-hmm.
At the end point, you just dismiss them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've handled this encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a scene a little bit later in the movie.
Yeah.
Where these same thugs are sitting in a car, and it says something to the effect of well, we got to get out of here. I don't feel safe here. And he says, well, we're a couple of black guys sitting in a beat up car in a bad part of town. Who do you think is gonna come after us? And the other guy says, Bullet Tooth Tony and his best friend Desert Eagle .50, and they look in the rearview mirror, and here comes the guy.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh crap, we got to get out of here." Now, again, that scene would have entirely happened differently if he hadn't established the reputation. If he hadn't had the lasting effect coming out of the previous encounter, that's how he was going to be handled.
And the last example that I have for that is John Wick. And it's literally the scene where he slides out of the darkness and puts his gun on the bouncer's shoulder up to his head, and he basically just tells him, he's like, "Hey, you've lost weight." He's like, "Yeah, 60 pounds." He's like, "You're looking good, thanks." So, are you here on business?
Are you here on business tonight, Mr. Wick?
Unfortunately, I am. Why don't you take the night off? And he literally just slowly turns at him and takes his earpiece out and says, "Thank you. I think I'll do that."
Yep.
And he just leaves. And that's a level of respect because he knows who John Wick is. He knows that for a decade, this man came here to get hits. And he completed them. He clearly is still alive. So this bouncer is effectively nothing to this guy, and he's got a gun to his head. And yet, he's still respectful of that moment, checks in with him, like, "I know who you are. I saw you every day. Why don't you go home? No one's going to think less of you."
Yeah.
Like, why
did you walk off the job? John Wick showed up. Oh, okay.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's fair.
So that's where reputation can come in after.
Yes.
So you can also use this as these lasting effects as ways to approach your players differently. Again, if your first encounter comes out and your players are all just murder hoboing their way through it, if that's what they're enjoying, maybe kind of plan things in a different way.
Sure.
Or help pull them in a direction. On the other hand, if they just start by talking out of it every time, and that seems to be really enjoyable for them, make sure that those options are available. Don't try and force them into fights every time.
Yeah, exactly.
And be understanding of that dynamic that you're listening to your players and their motivations within the story. And it'll change from time to time. You never know when someone's going to be super lazy,
Yeah, exactly. We should talk a little bit about balancing.
We should, because we're never going to get to... You know what? We have a podcast, and I can literally let this go as long as we want.
That's true. This might be a long episode.
I think we're going to run a little long. So let's talk about balancing.
All right. So balancing encounters, and this is really what triggered this whole discussion in the first place was, oh my God, how do you balance combat encounters? Because it's actually something that I've had a lot of frustration with, even in D&D that has a very structured setting for balancing encounters. It can sometimes be a real challenge. So one of the biggest things I think that the hurdles you're going to run into, especially if you're not playing a combat-inclined game like D&D, D&D does you the favor of giving everybody combat-based abilities and assuming that everybody is a combatant. Not every system will do that. For instance, Knox in the Box was in an Aberrant game with me, where we had a bit of a combat twink. It was played by Sean.
Okay.
And he had like Disintegrate or something like that as one of his abilities. He was harsh. But our other two characters were a mega social character, which was Knox in the Box's character, and his roommate's character was a mega intelligent character. So, how do you balance that combat encounter when one of your players can literally disintegrate things, and the other two are talkers and thinkers?
Yeah, it definitely gets a challenge.
And so I had this villain who was supposed to be a physical challenge for them, and I thought I really toned him down. Like, I didn't even give him anything gnarly, like the ability to like throw fireballs or anything like that. I literally was just like a couple points in mega strength and some mega endurance to, so he could throw a desk at you, and maybe a small compact car or something like that.
Sure.
And he could take a beating. With supernatural endurance, but he was nothing. It wasn't Magneto or anything like that.
Right.
Oh man, he still took like two of them out in one turn.
So, and this is where I kind of step into it. Is that when I look at combat encounters, I don't just look at the guy fighting. Whenever PCs step into combat. 9 times out of 10, when you're sitting at a table of 5 or 6 different players, or 11 or 15, one of them is immediately going to be your tactical genius. And I don't care what D&D group it is. If you put in front of them a rogue, a couple of combat archers, using crossbows, and a dude in the back waving his hands with a wand, one of the dudes at the table before the combat dice even hit are going to go, take out the mage.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where your brain goes. Hit the guy made of paper in the back who's literally launching fireballs at us. Then we can work our way through the room. That still is true for your NPCs. They're not just going to randomly pick somebody, and based on their intelligence and what they consider a threat is what's going to change that. Again, they're not going to want to die is another part of that. So, like, for instance, if you've got a bunch of wolves that come across your camp and they're hungry, they're going to take some opportunity there to go after something maybe weak that's a little farther away.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're threatened, they're going to pack up and they're going to either try and leave and defend themselves on the way out from whatever the heaviest threat is, or they're just going to leave altogether.
Right,
they're not going to get involved in that. On the other hand, if their motivation is that they're starving, they haven't eaten anything for a long time,
they might be a little desperate.
And they're going to go after the edge. They're going to keep their eyes focused on whoever's the biggest attacker, but they're going to try and circle around that weakling and drag them away every single time. Whereas other people might be like, hey, if we take out the heavy in this group, the rest of this group is just going to fold. And we don't have to worry about that talkie over there or the person cowering behind the table back there. We're just going to focus on the big problem that's set in front of us, the thing that's really going to take us down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you kind of got to think about where their mind frame is at and what they're targeting is going to happen. So, do we have some interesting chat going on here?
Yeah, we actually got a lot of chatter going on.
Okay.
Kind of about two. Well, I have two of the three players for my Aberrant game.
Nice.
So it's created some chatter. So I apologize
nice.
for the brief break there.
No.
But yeah, no, it's keeping those sort of things in there. Like whenever I write encounters, I always take into account the break conditions of the enemies.
Yeah.
When are they going to decide a certain amount of losses are going to be unacceptable and they are going to flee the things?
Yeah,
I don't think I've had a single fight yet in my D&D game where sentient opponents stayed to the end of the battle.
Yeah.
I think every single encounter you guys have had with the bandits, someone has run.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's exactly. And then the other part of that is when they aren't on the run, there's nothing to say you can't use waves.
Sure.
Like
waves are a great way of balancing an encounter.
Yeah, I mean the Mandalorian scene. If you haven't seen it, he's going after an encampment to go on the initial stuff, and there's a bunch of goons there, and he takes on those goons with somebody else. I'll leave it at that in case you haven't seen it. And then more show up out of the woodwork. They come out of doors. They show up on rooftops. It's a very Western style of things. And, they handle those situations. It kind of pins them down for a second, but they're still going to keep fighting. And then a giant Gatling gun comes out. Like all good Westerns. The big weapon comes out. And now they're like, oh, crap. Now we're pinned. Now we have to do something. We either flee or figure out a solution for this problem. And that kind of staging in an encounter can definitely lead to a point where the players feel overpowered and now they have to make a decision without it just being 60 guys in a room.
Exactly.
And you're not necessarily even... once you get up to that level, especially at that distance, you don't have to worry about the minutia anymore. Now it isn't, I need to account for this guy's attack and this guy's attack. I'm going to account for the 8 archers firing on you. You are suppressed in this position. You know that if you take a step, there's going to be at least 3 arrows going into your body.
Yep.
Without a doubt, that's going to happen. So now you have to manage this group of combat in a different way, and or find a unique solution to getting out of it.
Yeah.
So,
Hulavu in our live chat asks, would you ever balance an encounter for a specific player for either story or player engagement purposes? Absolutely.
Oh, of course.
Absolutely. Sometimes you have a player that you either, like you said, for narrative purposes or player engagement purposes, you want to throw a little red meat too.
Yeah.
So I've absolutely done that before where, if you've got a player that you don't feel has gotten, significant limelight, time in the story, or maybe they're feeling a little bored, or maybe they're feeling like their character's a little useless in the party or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. Throw them an encounter where they're going to shine in.
Yeah.
And even if you like, it's good for new players too. If you've got like a veteran table and like one new player, throw that new player a combat encounter where they're going to be like just the absolute ace. And even if you need to use it as a tutorial of like, if you use this ability, it would be really great right now because it would hit these guys. This is the situation you should use that ability in.
Right.
Just thought you should know in case you didn't fully understand how that worked.
Exactly.
Oh, wow, really? Yeah, roll some dice, man.
Yep.
And boom, the dice hit the table, the smiles brighten up, everybody has a great time, and it cost you nothing but 15 minutes and some minions.
When we were doing Shadowrun, Vicky's character, she didn't know what to do in Shadowrun. It's very technical, and she went with a very simple character named Meat. It was a giant troll with a bow and a whole crap ton of luck. But he was super strong. And we were literally involved in a chase, and she's like, okay, well, what can I do? Well, you have a giant bow that basically shoots tree limbs. At high velocity.
Let me show you how Goff hunts dragons.
And so, like, okay, well, what, can you shoot that truck back there? Sure. Pulls out the bow, pulls it out, fires, gets a critical hit, and then dumps a bucket of dice on the table for the roll. And literally, we just basically the whole truck explodes because she blew the engine block out with this thing.
And that player walks away from the table with a memory.
Exactly. We all did.
Yep.
We all did. And it showed a reputation for that troll as well.
Also, and to kind of piggyback off of Huluvu's question, too, I would actually say that if you can do that on multiple tiers, that's a great way of solving that problem of I've got a mega social character, a mega intelligent character, and a combat twink, is to break up the encounter so that the big slugger guy is dealing with the combat twink.
Yep.
And then you give maybe some minions that can easily be mind controlled by the mega charisma character, or put under his sway, as the name of the character was. And so while the slugger's dealing with the combat twink, he's dealing with the horde of minions, and maybe the intelligence character is maybe going like, okay, well, you guys handle that, but they've also sounded off some alarm klaxons. I'm going to be over here hacking the computer system, trying to get this all shut off.
The movie The Mummy, the final fight sequence in The Mummy. You've got the heavy fighting the heavy. You've got a guy trying to read out of a book quickly to redirect the monsters.
He's not a fighter. He's an intelligence character, but he's contributing.
Exactly. And so each one of the parts of that scene fit together differently.
Precisely.
So think about that kind of, it's theatrics in my mind, but really it's stationing off good sequences for your players.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And again, I still think that falls under the waves and layering.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Again, I'm just going to put this out there because I've got on the sheet multiple times. Lethality is not necessary. It is important for certain games, but I don't think it is necessary to push lethality all the time. I think it's too overdone. I think it's too overdone. Now, I think I know where you're going next.
The big question?
Yeah.
The big question.
That showed up on here, and we both kind of were like, oh boy.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so with combat encounters, especially with lethality possibly on the table as a thing, do you fudge the dice?
I'm going to flat out say it. I've done it.
Yep.
I've done it.
I've done it too. But I think it's one of those age-long questions, and I think the answer is very individual. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to do you fudge the dice.
No, I don't think so either. I think there's definitely, you should always be prepared.
Yes.
You should always be prepared to fudge dice. Or to make a mistake in your dice rolls or whatever.
So when let's real quick, just for anybody who's not entirely
new storytellers,
fudging the dice is when you roll like maybe an attack roll against somebody, and it's like a natural 20. You're gonna crit them, and you're just gonna obliterate them, but that character really or that player doesn't really want to lose their character, and if that character dies, maybe the whole combat encounter goes to crap, and it's just all gonna be bad around if you do go forward with that crit, and you're like. He rolled a 3. He missed.
Yeah.
And you lie through your teeth about what the outcome of that die was for what you believe to be the betterment of the story and the enjoyment of everybody at the table.
Correct. I'm not saying that that you should do it all the time, but I am saying that it's an important thing to keep in your pocket. And for the most part, I say you fudge to their favor. You should encourage your players. I mean, rolling dice to murder your players is not a beneficial thing for them. It doesn't get the story further along. It removes characters. You don't just remove main characters from your book. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, fudging to their benefit moves the story forward, especially near end of fights. That's the best time to do it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, end rolls are not always necessary. If there's two guys left with minor hit points left, and someone's going after them, finish it off.
Yeah, you can literally just narrate that, like, okay, you chase them down, you finish them off.
Yeah, are you chasing them down to finish them off, or are you chasing them down to pin them? I'm going to pin them. Okay. You capture them, you pin them to the ground. Tell me how you take them down.
Yeah, handily. Yeah. Tell me how you do it, and then we'll run the story from there, right? I don't know. I'm kind of two minds. I think, like, if you're to the point where I've had it happen before, I think, where the die roll ruined the story for me. I remember specifically one 7th Sea game.
Okay.
Where we had gone through all this work. I think this was Fleischer's Floundering Fisheries.
Okay.
Where we were trying to do all this political maneuvering to get this one nobleman on our side to essentially join forces to basically unite this country.
Yeah.
And we had gone through all these machinations. We had pulled all these strings, done all these different encounters to try to really get all of our ducks in a row. And we had a really good plan. And then it basically came down to we needed to convince the guy that all of the stuff that we did for him was good enough for him to join our side.
Yep.
And we rolled... You gave us a big handful of dice, basically, and you rolled it. And it wasn't high enough. He essentially rolled to resist our pitch.
Yeah.
And it felt bad.
Yeah.
It felt bad. And I believe I gave you that feedback at the time, too. I was like, I don't feel like after all this effort, it should have been left up to a die roll. Because I feel like the dice screwed us out of the outcome that should have been narratively satisfying to us,
Yeah. Yeah. And in even looking back on that as a storyteller, I was like, I thought I was following mechanics in my head, that this was going to be an epic roll, and you guys would have all these numbers, and it would have this great meaning. And I was like, and it failed.
Yeah.
It laid flat on its face. I was like, crap.
Something that shouldn't have been left up to chance.
Yep. And then that's the thing is that if you leave something up to chance, 9 times out of 10, chance will mess with you.
Chance will mess with you. So I would say if you're considering fudging the dice, consider not rolling.
Yeah.
And just giving the narrative outcome that you want.
Yep.
Yeah.
Roll behind the screen. That's the term.
Yeah.
Roll behind the screen. Because dice making sound could be anything.
All right. So a couple other fun things.
Okay.
Yeah?
No, sure. I'll go fun.
All right. So here's how to make your combat encounters a little more interesting. Some pepper and spice you can throw in there.
A little bit of flavor. Put a little pepper at the end. Little pepper.
Little Salt Bae.
Okay.
All right. So things to consider, especially if you are using like miniatures and like maps or terrain or something like that. If you've seen our Instagram, I kind of go all out on these things, or at least used to. Back when we were able to meet in person for our D&D games, is some verticality in your encounters. Everybody wants to put out the flat combat map, but consider, if you're able to, having some terrain that has some verticality to it.
A cliffside.
A cliffside, or even just like tiers, of like some steps that go up to like a raised area of your map or something like that. Think about like in your own downtown area, how many places where there's just like a slight incline. And there might be some steps up, and it might only go up like 5 feet.
Sure.
But then there's a little garden area up there, and there's,
railing or whatever.
But that sort of verticality adds visual interest and tactical interest too. Because it might, 2 spaces that are right next to each other on your battle map might not be combat adjacent. Because of verticality to each other.
Yep.
So consider that if you have those options.
Yep.
And if you do the miniatures and such like that. Even if you don't, you can still theater of the mind's eye, that sort of stuff.
Yep.
But consider the third dimension. Another thing is encounters with complications.
Oh God, yeah.
Okay. So,
and we're not just talking like you're fighting a ship and it's slick and it's rainy. We're talking about that all the way out.
All right, so one of the best things I think that like Dungeons and Dragons did in 5th edition was layer actions. I love layer actions.
I'm waiting to use them more.
Oh, I know. You've got to find the right spot to do them, but they're so choice when you do. And what layer actions are basically is that the environment itself, either because it has been magically altered by the being whose layer it is, or because it has been prepared or trapped in a certain way, or maybe even just because it is naturally precarious and offers its own dangers. Layer actions are essentially things that happen on a certain initiative count,
right?
That just happen to the environment. Typically, there's 2 or 3 different things that will happen. You choose between them. They may be gouts of lava that are coming up from the floor.
Sure.
I've seen one where there was on Critical Role, where there was a supernatural creature that commanded a great number of drowned ghosts, and they were swarming in and terrifying everybody for rounds on end if they didn't make a wisdom save. All sorts of great stuff you can do with there, like falling rocks. If a giant dragon fighting inside of its cavernous thing might be thrashing around and like shaking loose some stalagmites from the ceiling.
Yeah,
those can make combat encounters pretty dicey and
very much so.
a lot more exciting.
Fighting another person while a kraken is tearing the boat apart.
Yes,
was another thing. But that you have things that'll affect both sides. And you can take that chance if you want to have it affect the other side as well. Sieges are great for that, when you've got lots of people and siege weapons flying in.
Oh, yeah.
Your combat may be only happening in a very small section of that, but every once in a while, a freaking siege rock comes in and breaks some of the terrain up.
A hail of arrows, or yeah, exactly.
Or the spell, summoning thing is going off, and so things are lifting off the ground a la anime style, and now the terrain is changed. So now what was flat is now broken up into pieces and floating around.
Yes, absolutely.
And
another idea I had too was like fighting over possession of an object that could shift the tide of battle. So like for instance,
light switch.
Yeah. So imagine, a battle where you've got like an orb that can summon bolts of lightning from it, just sitting in the middle of the room. Right. Anybody who touches it can use their action to summon a bolt of lightning.
Sure.
And that includes the enemies. So now you've got this like King of the Hill territory control thing going on top of the combat encounters. So it adds another third tactical element to it.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to do things like that. That'll really spice your thing. You came up with the idea of a staff of staff of staff of the seas or something like that.
You control the monsters and the ocean.
Where there's a kraken attacking, and he who holds the staff commands the kraken.
Right.
So that
or you have stuff that ends when you take care of it. A la this light switch will turn. This thing will be the light switch that turns off the mechanized army.
Right.
Right. Or that turns off the lava flow or whatever. It can always be like the one. The rocket's going to launch in 60 seconds, and so each step of that process creates things from like. All the engineers in the room trying to protect it, with the guards and stuff, to everybody starting to clear the room because now there's going to be fire in said room. And once that fire starts up, that thing's going to launch into space. So, like, there's all kinds of things that you have to do while these guys are shooting at you to try and stop the situation.
Yep.
All
right, let's see here.
I think we took care of that.
Talked about that.
We talked about that. If you're a player, what are your obligations for handling encounters? And in my personal opinion, when you step into an encounter, step into it as your character. We do that really well with non-encounters, but we don't necessarily do it great as an encounter. So meaning, if my character goes in and has a conversation with somebody, I can pretty much do that. But if just before dice hits the table for initiative, or even after it hits the table, if your character's like, holy crap, what the hell's going on here? Play it that way. You don't have to immediately go into combat. Even though you might be on the first initiative, your first initiative reaction might be, yo, put your guns down. Let's just step off this. We don't need this right now.
Yep.
Like I want to drive somewhere. And that's all I'm doing. I'm going down the street here,
I have, with my cleric character in Sean's D&D game, done whole round actions where I did nothing but stand there and preach.
Yeah.
Just, I'm going to take the defense action and preach this turn.
Yeah. There have been really great scenes in movies where, like, I think Robin Hood did it, where Robin Hood's fighting somebody, and Azim is literally doing nothing, and he's just like, "Aren't you going to help?" He's like, "You seem to be doing just fine."
Yeah, you got this handled.
Yeah,
you whine like a mule. You're still alive.
Exactly, and like those kind of moments can happen between players. Like, there's nothing wrong with like the thug of your group, the fighter, like, "Hey man, give me your money," and the thug just kind of looks over at him and is just like, "I'm gonna go get a beer." And then that guy literally turns to the mage, "Give me your money." "Aren't you gonna do something about this?" "I said I'm gonna go get a beer." Like, you should probably handle that guy. I think he needs some money.
It reminds me of the only man rule that I know. And that is that if one of your buddies is getting his butt kicked, you are obligated to jump in and help him. Unless, at any point in the last 24 hours, you've looked at said friend and said, "What that guy needs is a good ass kicking."
Exactly. Fair enough. Before we get into questions, I do want to say that I highly recommend you guys, I know it's International Podcast Day, but go check out Guy's YouTube channel. He actually has another video there that I will be posting up there that's 3 noob DM combat mistakes. And it does really good talking about rules-based stuff, being NPC-focused, or dealing with combat only. And it goes into a higher level of detail than we've kind of gone with this, and breaks down some of the stuff we've talked about, funny enough, to almost an nth degree.
Yeah.
But it really helps with just trying to avoid the stuff that you make critical mistakes on. That your brain gets focused on, you go, "Man, I shouldn't have done it that way." It is great for that.
And his YouTube channel is How to Be a Great Game Master?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. Correct. Go ahead and check that out. How to Be a Great Game Master on YouTube. Really great advice there.
Yeah, it's solid stuff. So, we have lots of questions.
Oh my god, we have so many questions.
We do.
This was bound to be just like an hour and a half show.
It really was. It's a mini-series, thankfully.
So for those of you listening to us on the pre-recorded podcast,
yeah, welcome for a little bit more time.
Yeah, you get a little free podcast.
That's right. So,
because it wasn't free before.
I guess it was free all the time. Do you want to just start into... let's go with the questions of this week, because I'm looking at this other one. I almost feel like this one needs to go somewhere else, this first question.
This first question from the previous week?
Yeah, because we said we want to talk about this with something else. And
That's fine.
I kind of want to put this one off, but...
That's fine.
All right, so the Mad Elf asks that he's curious about the perspectives on the positive and negative aspects of crunchy, detailed, specific combat versus streamlined, abstract systems. So, on the systems basis, for context, Hero and GURPS are very detailed, while World of Darkness and Mouse Guard tend to be more abstract and less in the resolution process. I like them both for different reasons. It depends on how I'm feeling. For instance, I think that D&D does a good job with crunchy, tactical kind of stuff when you've got a group that wants to do tactical things and kind of move through a tactical numbers-based system. And I think Mouse Guard shines exceptionally well with the, I'm going to sit on the couch and have a conversation with my friends and mutually tell a story, and when combat comes around, we'll discuss it. Like we do. I'm not really going to weigh heavily into anything, and it's going to be a very narrative discussion. And for me, that's positive. I see both of those positive. I see the negative in it is that for players who have a hard time with abstracts, with theater of the mind's eye.
Yeah,
those abstract stuff can get very challenging.
I was going to say that
we've got players at our table who have a hard time when I say, well, the room is this big and this is in it, and you find this, and you guys are coming in on the second floor, and there's a large flight of stairs. They're like, whoa, can we draw this up? Because I have no idea what you just said.
Right.
Like, I'm lost completely on where we are. And so things like that, for when you're dealing with, like, more theater of the mind's eye stuff, it gets very challenging. And having a tactical system where you could literally set down a grid and help those people through a tactical layout, those games are envious to those people. They love that kind of moment because it brings them back into the world, the physicalness of it.
Yeah, I think for me, like you said, it kind of scratches two different itches. There is a part of me that really likes the concrete, crunchy rules of tactical games like D&D. I think I complain a lot about GURPS, but I think I would actually enjoy it if I got into a game.
I'm going to say one thing before you keep going, because I think it might help.
Yeah, what's that?
I think the crunchy games give you the feeling that you're beating it.
Yeah, maybe not beating it, but make you feel more in control of the situation. I think
that you have a win.
That you have more control over the environment because you can manipulate it with more minutia.
Yeah, whereas the other side doesn't quite give you that. It gives you a
story that's more loose,
enjoyable. Like
yeah.
it's relaxation. Even when it's a tense moment, it's not combat tense. Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of intensity. It's dramatic tension.
Yeah. So I mean, positive and negative aspects of them versus one or the other. Obviously, I think the crunchy versions are going to give you a lot more control over the minutia of things, which can be very good. There are going to be a lot more hard details for people who have trouble with abstract descriptions and concepts and stuff.
Even from the storytelling aspect.
Yeah. But obviously you're getting down into more minutia, and so therefore it tends to bog things down a little bit more when it may not be that important. Whereas with abstract systems, it's a lot more narrative. And so you don't get into all those like minor little minutia.
Yeah.
I think they flow a lot better from a story. Like it takes you out of the story less, I think. I think one of the main problems I have with like crunchy systems is that it feels like you're shifting modes
between plot and
like from narrative, and now all of a sudden we roll initiative, and now it's a board game, and now we're going to shift back out of board game mode and into narrative mode again. And sometimes that shift isn't always clean or clear where or when it should happen.
It's because of the pauses required for it.
Yeah.
And, when you step into that, you're waiting for the player to make an action, and that action in their mind is very tactical and I have to take my time to figure this out. I don't have a snap response. And that time slows down that feeling of narrative.
Yeah. Whereas with your narrative systems, if you can work with the abstract nature of them, where it's not important if you're 5 feet or 10 feet away.
Yep.
Your spells don't necessarily have a hard range to them. Things like that. It's just kind of whatever's narratively reasonable and within the rules that are sketched out.
Right.
If you can handle that aspect of it, then they don't have that mode shift.
No.
Because combat is just another narrative element.
Yep.
And I think that's great.
Yeah, I agree.
But I'm very excited about like Fate's combat rules, where you don't even have like a map necessarily. You have zones. And the zones are defined as abstract spaces within the battle.
Right.
So you might have like the studio is one space. And just people who are in the studio are assumed to be able to affect each other in combat.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're 5 feet away from them, 10 feet away from them.
Right.
You can make that happen. You're close enough because you're in the same zone.
Right.
Whereas like upstairs in the house is another zone.
Right. Okay. Let's grab another one. I think that was good.
All right. So Knox in the Box asks us, sometimes in certain video games and possibly tabletop, there will be a third-party C faction to offset the typical A faction versus B faction dynamic. Sometimes this C faction can be convinced to help you, other times turn against you. What are some ways to seamlessly put a mechanic like this into a combat scenario and enable quick decisions and story direction? Is this even advised? Sure.
100%.
Absolutely.
I would say the easiest way that I've always seen it is the bystander. It's a reputation based on bystander. For instance, Star Wars. I don't like you. He doesn't like you either. Lightsaber comes out. Arm gets chopped off. Does anybody move to help those two guys who just tried to take on a Jedi? No.
You said lightsaber got involved. I am... You know what? My beer is very interesting right now.
Exactly. Yes. Mandalorian did the exact same thing.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand, how many times in movies, especially Westerns, have you seen the good guy get into a bar fight with like 5 or 6 other guys, and he's got like one other friend, and maybe the dancing girl who's there, smashes a bottle over one of the guy's head who just was lifting up a chair.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you get that third party faction and that weight. That what makes these people good? Do they have a weight in that room?
You can also come into the whole enemies of my enemies are my enemies thing.
The Dick Tracy thing, yes.
Yeah, where so Party A and Party B hate each other and they're fighting, but Party C shows up and both Party A and B hate C.
Right.
And so Party A and Party B form a temporary battlefield alliance because they both agree that C is a bigger problem than whatever they've got going on.
Dem Cardassians.
Uh-huh. So
or Kardashians.
That's another great way of playing it.
Yeah.
But it really all depends on what's narratively appropriate. But absolutely, throwing a third party into an A versus B conflict. Mm-hmm. We mentioned those other great ways of complicating things, complicating your battles to make them interesting.
Yep.
That's a great way to make them interesting.
Yep. You never know when The Rock is going to come in with scorpion legs.
Yeah, I can't even smell what he's cooking.
Nobody can. Nobody can. It's way too strong.
All right, so Overwatch asks, have you ever had a random or minor background encounter take on a life of its own and become the focus of a campaign campaign fixture? And also, is that something to be encouraged or avoided?
Padre Inguis.
You're already laughing, so I'm just going to pass this one right off to you.
Padre Inguis was a one-shot. I had created an encounter in a town where there was going to be a priest and basically informing the group that there was going to be an inquisition. And now, granted, this was not a combat encounter directly. It was going to lead to a combat encounter, but it was basically plot element coming out. And this guy was just a priest in the area, and he was letting letting the group know that basically there was going to be inquisitors showing up in town soon. And the group rolled hard into making him their friend. And it totally changed the direction of that character because suddenly now he was enamored with one of the characters, a female character, and he needed to save her and help her because, the Inquisition was going to come and, they might see things differently. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Madre de Dios was the word of the day. And now that character, that NPC has carried through the story and into other stories.
I've become a major NPC. Yeah.
He has been.
You started handing him out to other people in the 7C community, I think.
Yeah, actually, I did. There was a question that came up on I think in Reddit where they were looking for NPCs, and I put together that so other people could have him and use him in other campaigns. So yeah, definitely have had that happen. Is it something to be encouraged or avoided? Honestly, I think you should be... It
depends on your game.
Yeah. I mean, plot rolls in different directions, and you never know what your players are going to attach to, even for a short period of time, and there's nothing to say that you can't roll your plot with whatever that thing was. I knew a story about I heard from one of my other players that I play with, in another game where basically there was a girl stuck at the bottom of a well, and she was supposed to get killed. Mm-hmm. So that they would go and search what was going on in the well. Instead, they saved her, brought her out, found out she was homeless, then fed her, watered her, and sent her to college. Like, they built up a fortune around her to support her into the future. And the storyteller took that and used it. Mm-hmm. Not heavily, didn't get as far as where he wanted to in the story, but she was going to become a character. Yeah. Like a main piece that was going to go forward. Not necessarily in the direction that they intended. So
yeah, I don't think I've ever had that happen in my game. But with regards to whether it should be encouraged or avoided, I think it really kind of depends on what type of game you're playing. I think if you're playing a little more of like an open world, hey, let's see where the story takes us sort of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, lean into it.
Yeah, why not?
If that's where the story's taking you, that's where the story's taking you. But I tend to run more linear style stories. Mm-hmm. With more of an expected outcome. So I'll be honest, I would probably downplay something like that.
Sure.
And try to get people back on track with what I've written. But if I find it interesting or inspiring or feels like it isn't a derailment, mm-hmm. then I'll lean into it.
Okay.
But I think I have to also be inspired by that diversion as well.
Sure.
If it's just we want to spend 4 game sessions talking to this NPC because we think they're amusing.
Mm-hmm.
man, I got better things to do with my time than you fawning over some random NPC I threw in there.
Agreed.
So, all right. Next question is, let's see here. Samantha asks, sorry if this has already been done. I know you had a whole episode about remoting. What are your thoughts on video calling or voice calling for remote sessions?
I think it depends on the game. I mean, I don't have a problem with just voice.
Yeah.
For most of my players, but like, I think in games where reactions mean something, video helps. I think in games like City of Mist or any of those apocalypse games where combat isn't so much, but there is a lot of character to character and character to NPC vocal discussions. Sometimes seeing someone's face helps a lot.
Yeah.
With getting those points across. And I know for some storytellers, knowing that their players are engaged with the story is helpful for them early on.
Yes.
And so seeing them at their computer staring at the screen or staring at the game and feeling engaged helps them know I'm a good storyteller. And I think from a player perspective, sometimes you need to give that up to your storyteller. You need to let them know, I have no problem having my camera on, because I'm going to be focused on you in this game versus, suddenly Tom is never at his mic. And when you're asking for him, all you hear is some noise in the background. Like, oh, yeah. Oh, okay. I'm going to do this. And you're like, were you even here? Do you know what's going on?
Yeah.
And that can be very disenchanting for storytellers.
I think that the one common thing that all tabletop role-playing games have in common is that they are a social activity.
Yes.
And I think the more you can do to enhance that social aspect, seeing other people's smiling faces, seeing the reactions on their faces, even just more than keeping tabs on them to make sure they're paying attention, but just, just seeing the delight on their faces when you drop a plot point on them, or seeing everybody laughing and smiling when the noble asshole bard says something that's just witty and off kilter, and you want to punch him and kiss him at the same time.
Truth.
Seeing those reactions out of your players can really make or break the enjoyment of the game. And I think having had game sessions that were just voice, and having had game sessions where we did have cameras involved, over this pandemic, I think I see the value in a camera.
Yeah.
I also think my camera is absolute rubbish. And
I picked up a new one. They're not that expensive, but what's funny is how much they went up in price just because of the pandemic.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I bet.
Yeah. There's actually a really nice one at Costco for sale. Let me know if you need it.
Okay.
It's on super sale. Finally, we got Hulavu who asks, I had an idea for a while. Is it possible to play a system like D&D where all attacks take place at the same time? Something like all players make their moves in secret and reveal at the same time. I'll let you take this.
Okay. So we got talking. Oh god, and I can't remember if we were talking about this on the air or were we talking about this in person about Crimson Skies.
We were talking about this with Overwatch.
Off air.
Okay. This was so we were on headset, which is why you remembered it that way, because we were doing it over Discord.
That's why. So we were talking, and this is when we were brushing up on FASA for our
it's a FASA product
for a Shadowrun system spotlight.
Yep.
It was an old FASA product called Crimson Skies, and it was essentially a hex based 1920s prop plane dogfighting combat game. And how combat worked in that game is everybody wrote down their moves, and then you all revealed them at the same time.
Yep.
And so, and then trying to predict what other people's moves would be was a whole gameplay mechanic.
Yeah, because and then the dice you were saying affects how they're whether or not they have a bit of information or not.
So moves have a distance, a direction, and a facing.
Yes.
So what hex face you would be pointed towards, how many hexes you would be moving, and in left, right, or center direction.
Right.
And so depending on if you were tailing them, if you were behind them, you could predict their movement. And so depending on what you would roll there, depending on what information they had to give you.
Right.
I could just tell you, I'm going to the right. Or I'm going to tell you I'm going 2 hexes to the right.
Right.
Or I'm telling you I'm doing a 2R a maneuver.
Right.
And now you know that I'm going 2 hexes to the right, I'm going to be facing this hex facing. You know exactly where I'm going to be.
Right.
So now you know where to move to stay on my ass.
Right.
And pump that plane full of lead. You know? So tactically, yeah, this is a thing. And it was really cool.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see some mechanics shifted that way. I don't think D&D could do it, but I want to say there's got to be something out there that feels like that. But it could be challenging, but I think it works really well for Crimson Skies and things like that.
Yeah, I think because of the format of it, I could see it working very well in BattleTech.
Yeah, I mean, technically BattleTech kind of does that.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
You don't go down when you take your damage from whoever shot you.
That's true. All damage is resolved at the end of the turn.
Correct. So, like, again, you could stomp the yard with somebody, and then their unload on you could stomp the yard on you.
Yes.
So.
Yes. So I think more in a tactical sense, though. I think the more tactical the gameplay, the better this works. I don't know that it would work for something like D&D. But because I still think it's still too narrative and turn-based, but I don't know.
I think you could make arguments to do it that way, to make it more reaction-based.
Doesn't Shadowrun have a mechanic where your initiative, you actually go backwards, declaring what you're going to do?
Ooh.
And then the person who wins initiative has to declare, or essentially doesn't have to declare because there's no one to declare it to at that point. Everybody states their intentions, and then you go back up initiative?
BattleTech does that. BattleTech does that. You go backwards and forwards, and it's based upon initiative, because that way the last person, it's move and attack and in reverse.
Right, okay.
So that's where you're remembering that. But I think there is something like that out there, because I am remembering it, but
basically, yeah, if you lose initiative, you have to tell everybody what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then you end up doing it last.
Right.
So everybody gets a chance to react to you, and that's you technically go first in initiative if you lose. But that's your penalty, is because everybody gets to react to what you just did.
Yeah, Settlers of Catan as a board game basically has that as well. Like, you get first pick, but the person who gets last pick also gets to lay first. So you may get your first position, but you're also the last person to get your stuff down on the table.
Yeah.
So
Overwatch confirms one version of Shadowrun did that. Not sure which version.
Yeah, neither am I, because, I started in on 2nd edition, but yeah.
Yeah, same season. I barely ever played it, so.
Yeah, so. But no, I think there's some merit there.
Yeah, there's definitely some merit there. And there's also some, while we're briefly on the subject, too, there are some alternate initiative systems out there for D&D that make things a little more tactical, and it's not just as simple as a D20 roll. Sometimes there's, like, you rolling your hit dice, or, having a variable initiative in combat and such. I would do a search for, like, alternate D&D, initiative, and see what you come up with. Because there could be some interesting systems out there for you.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty good for today.
Yeah, all right.
So next week we're going to get into continuing the topic with miniseries with social encounters. You can find us on Twitter at @ST_conclave, on Instagram at @ST_conclave. If you're listening to us live right now on mixlr.com, you can find us there at mixlr.com/storytellerconclave. And our Discord link is available in our Twitter or on our website at https:/storytellerconclave.com.
I want to thank our Patreon members for supporting us every month. That's Knox in the Box, Sam, the Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, and everybody else who donates to us. Thank you so much for supporting us. We love every one of you.
Thank you so much.
Our pre-show music was by Arcane Anthems. You can find them at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music was Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find them at geefrogmusic.weebly.com. And our outro music, which you're hearing now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find her at soundcloud.com/midairmachine/tracks.
We'd like to thank our families and everybody else in the podcast community who's basically making this a wonderful thing to do. There are plenty of other people out there, so please go listen to some of the links that we've established. Maybe you'll find a show that fits for you.
Yeah, happy Free Podcast Day, everybody.
Yeah, happy Free Podcast Day. Thanks, Vicky and Sean, for helping us through all of this chaos that we do all the time, every week, like clockwork. Our friends who are there with our games, who've given us these stories to have, and you. our listeners. We appreciate every one of you.
We love you. Good night.
Good night.